Yeah, is it a Wi-Fi problem or is it server problem?
It could just
power problem.
Miteco works quite good, so it shouldn't be a Wi-Fi problem.
Miteco use. It doesn't.
But when I'm not having power and don't have power, that's not good.
It could just as well. I think we can do that here.
Data Tracker just woke up.
Just give me one. So, like we're using the semi-token position request set here, not overriding it here. You could just do that yourself. So you say that the first applications will come on the uni one. So that's one. Yeah. And C2 will be able to know because we can start by starting.
So good afternoon. This is the core meeting. I hope most of you have had lunch. I haven't. Working Chairs meeting ran out of lunch. I'm Carsten Bormann. This is Jaime Jimenez. And this is the core working group. So just a quick reminder, it's Tuesday, so I think you are not completely bored by this content yet. We assume people have read the drafts. This is not a tutorial here. Meetings serve to advance difficult issues by making good use of face-to-face communication. That's why we meet here. We work as individuals and try to be nice to each other. We were just reminded in the working group chairs meeting that maybe is worth saying now and then. So maybe we can make a point out of saying that more often. And now I have to go to the legal side. Sorry about that. The IETF is working under some principles, which include IPR principles. IPR doesn't exist, but anyway, we have principles for them. And so we have to follow them. And in short, if you know about patent claims to some technology, you cannot talk about that technology, or you can tell us that those are the two ways of doing that. And you got some more detailed information when you registered on how to do that, and other issues like what happens when harassment goes on, and so on. Okay, so this is the formal part. Let's look at the agenda. We asked for 3 hours for this meeting, got 3.5, but we are still a little bit cramped. That's why we have minutes, but I don't have a clock, so the minutes are meaningless. So we will spend 9 minutes on this introduction. Then we will have a quick check whether we are done with the Echo request token draft. Maybe a quick check of stateless for 3 minutes. Where's Klaus? Oh, right in front of me. That's hard to see. Then we will spend 45 minutes on group communication and the related security issues. 23 minutes on CNML, 14 minutes on CoreConf. I hope at that time we have enough time accumulated that we have a little bit more than 14 minutes. And then we have some miscellaneous items. And if we are way too fast, we might be pulling up items from Friday, as the slide clearly says. So on Friday, we are doing a number of things. Mostly because people cannot be here today. So for instance, Peter, who is sitting over there, cannot be here today. So we put the resource directory work on Friday. Unfortunately, CoreConf stayed today. And we are going to do various core applications. And we even have a new item, the speedy block transfer proposal by Jin, who's sitting over there in the first row. There is an yes.
Eduardo Petrev. So will it be possible on Friday to have a few minutes for updates on seed draft? Because,
Yes.
I mean, we are still discussing some things
Yeah.
with Ayana, and maybe we will have some progress to report there.
Let's talk about that at the end of the CallConf
Okay.
part. So I spent 10 minutes before the working group chairs lunch talking with Michelle Cotton about ways of running this, and not quite everything is in order. It's almost done, but a few details probably need to be addressed, so we may have to come back on Friday. Okay, a few other things are happening this meeting. I'm not pointing to other working group meetings this time, but we have a number of hallway discussions and site meetings, and also research group meetings that fit into this. So on the subject of coral, which we will discuss on Friday in the resource directory segment, we have some more extensive meetings. Klaus, if you want to talk about that.
So we have been discussing this Coral hypermedia format in the T2TRG for a while. And now it's getting some interest also from Core, for example, in this RD discussion, which will happen on Friday. But because the Core agenda is already so packed, I thought it would be good to have a side meeting in between. And that is happening on Wednesday between 3 and 5 in room Tirolka. And right after this Core meeting is the T2TRG summary meeting, where I will have a short introduction to Coral for people who don't know it yet. And one interesting thing that might interest some people is that Coral covers a lot of use cases where we use link format right now. So there have been ideas about eventually replacing with link format with Coral. If you're interested in that, please come to T2TRG meeting and the site meeting on Wednesday. Thank you.
So for those people who plan to go to the How Does the Router Work meeting on Wednesday, which is occurring in the same time slot, I have been assured that there will be a YouTube video of that. So you can watch that from the comfort of your own couch and can go to this site meeting. So is there anything planned about protocol negotiation? Microphone?
Hi, Bill here from Tampere University. So we do have a small hallway discussion together with the people from Christian's side to discuss this tomorrow at after the morning coffee break, so about 11:20. So we haven't exactly finalized the location, but somewhere in that area.
So would anybody in this room want to take part in this hallway meeting? A lot of people. So please coordinate with Bill.
Okay, so I'll send a mail to the mailing list, and we can find a place for that. Thank you.
Great. PubSub security. We actually already had a side meeting at the hackathon. That turns out to be our new unstructured time repository at the IETF. So things get done at the hackathon, not just code. And we will have some slides about the results from that later. And there also was some time planned for Observe and PubSub. Microphone.
A bit of discussion has already happened, but I'd like to continue on that. I don't have a particular point in time, so I'll send to the mailing list, please coordinate with me so that we could meet again.
Yeah, it would probably be good to do this before the Friday morning PubSub slot.
Yes.
So like Friday 8 to 9, maybe? Friday 8 to 9?
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Should we? Who would want to join that part? Klaus, Francesca, Jim, Marco. Great. Okay. Yeah, you're right. We cannot celebrate yet. this was the agenda bashing for this meeting, but we actually plan to do the routine we have developed between the previous meeting and this meeting, and have virtual interim approximately every 2 weeks. So what we will probably do is, between the working groups who like doing that, like CORE, CBOR, COSI, they all have to start with a C or it doesn't work. These will probably agree on a common slot, and then we will go back and forth between CORE and CBOR, and maybe do a COSI meeting in between and things like that. So this is the current state of the discussion. And what we have to do is find a time when we want to do it this time, because it really works much better when everybody knows it's Sunday at 9 a.m. or whatever. So we will have to find a good time for that. Last time we tried that, and we had a doodle and decided on something, and then people came and said, it doesn't work for me, we have to change it. So in the end, we had different times for CBOR and CORE, and that was a bit suboptimal. So this time, there will be an announcement on the mailing list, and please go to the doodle there and say how things work for you. So the general idea of doing this on a Wednesday does appeal to a lot of people. But the time, of course, is difficult in an international organization. Is that all I need to say about that? Okay, so Francesca, Jim, various chairs who would be in this pool of people organizing that. Good, and now we finally can celebrate. Yeah, that was a long time. Yeah, do you want to say something about the last minutes until it finally happened? What had to be done there?
Just thank you to everybody who gave useful feedback and participated in this work.
With my designated expert hat on, I have a question to the authors. I have now received the request for a co-op option number, and there's confusion which one you want.
9.
9?
I know, that's the number that has been said. You know this Dilbert, where Dilbert introduces a random number generator, and that always says 9 when you ask it. But that was not it. We had discussed this and had come up with a number 9 for a number of good reasons.
So it wasn't specified anything in the draft except a desire for a low number.
Yes.
And then IANA, of course, picked one, and they picked 10.
So
doesn't work.
We had been told not to request numbers because this is not how you do registration for IANA, but we had a note for the IANA to say, please ask the designated expert to pick the right number. So 9.
So just as a hint to authors, if there is a number that is kind of obvious that needs to be chosen, then I type this number into the draft and prefix it with the 3 letters TBD. So there is a TBD 9, to be defined 9, in the draft, and everybody knows, okay, that is supposed to be a 9 unless something weird happens. Okay, so that is one thing off the list. We still have 26 drafts on our roster in various stages, so we have to work a little bit faster on getting them done. So the core multi-part is in IETF last call, so we have to wait until April 8th. We just completed the working group last call on CNML fetch patch. I don't know if everybody in this room was aware. You can still send in comments, but officially the working group call is completed, and the next version will probably then be submitted because there wasn't anything major. The hop limit draft is really ready for working group last call, and the dev URN draft, I have told Yari that he doesn't really have to come here because there are no open issues. So this is mostly waiting for a chair's review, and then we can last call that as well. So this is 4 more documents in various stages of completion. So we are not going to return to these documents during the meeting. If you have anything to say about them, say them now. Good. So we can start with the agenda. And I already used up half of your time.
I think I can make it with one slide there. So, okay. So, echo request tag and token processing. I think I missed the last part on the introductory slide. Is about fixing a few security issues that have come up with various interactions of the protocol. We've received a chair review of that and processed several comments, most of which were editorial. Kind of the elephant in the room that was that we are now hoping to have adequately addressed, but haven't confirmed that yet, is the topic of token processing, where in earlier stages it was a bit confusing whether everyone now needs to use sequential tokens or whether that's just or whether there is a more smarter way to do that. So now the document has been updated to require that the client prevents the attack scenarios that is that a response is being assigned to a different request than it was intended for, and makes suggestions on how that can be done, but doesn't prescribe any particular way of doing it. So of course, still doing sequence numbers is one way. Not relying on for example, a DTLS layer for request response matching because the requests and responses are OSCO protected as well is another way. There are others that interact with the DTLS stack. So for example, if you know that your windows are of a particular size and in a particular state, then this may also allow you to use tokens in a different way, but it now states that the client must take care of that because otherwise there are request-response mismatch attacks that can happen. But in general, the document is in working group last call, so if you have comments, please send them. I'll leave that slide here because if there's any feedback, I'd expected to go to this. So that's it from my side. Any questions, comments? Oh, that's a blue sheet.
Yeah, I just would like to comment that I sent a message to the waiting list half an hour ago.
I'm sorry, I didn't process that yet.
Yeah, so that's just mostly editorial comments on this section 5. So take your time looking at that, whether you want to process this, and I think then we can do the working group last call.
And you're fine with the token processing?
Yes, the 2 editorial comments, of course, are about the token processing.
Yeah,
so
the kind of the mechanism.
Even improved further.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Douglas.
I keep it short, no slides. We in Core received a while ago a request from the 6-dish working group for a draft describing how you could create co-op proxies that don't maintain any kind of per client state. So they have this scenario where a lot of clients go through one co-op proxy, and for DDoS reasons, they don't want to keep any state for those clients at the proxy. And we have now written such a draft in Core. It is the stateless draft, and it's, in my opinion, ready for working group last call. So there are no open issues left. Please take a look and let me know what you think.
So I think there has been some recent discussion on the mailing list. Is anybody who were part of that discussion interested in bringing this up here?
By the way, are 6-ish people in the room?
Yes, Malisha with Trinity Inria. Yeah, so I'm one of the authors of Minimal Security. So I would just like to thank you for the work and the progress. It was really quick for us. We were blocked, unfortunately, with our draft, so we were back in second working group last call. But I would be happy to take a look during the working group last call of stateless if this is still fine with us. But last time I checked, it was okay for us. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So the next item is Group Common Security.
Marco Tiloca, RISE. This is another update to Grupo Score, based mostly on another review we got from Jim after Bangkok and several discussions with other people. Thanks a lot about that. So I'm going to quickly summarize the main updates, non-editorial ones to the text, and I have in line to recap later on still open points for discussion. So we reverted the signature bit in the flag byte to reserved and set to 0, so we don't explicitly signal the presence of the signature that is there anyway. And we also, in order to admit more flexibility, included a new parameter in the common security context that is then reflected with an analogous parameter in the external EAD, specifying the exact parameters for the used counter-signature algorithm used, if any parameters apply, of course. And the exact structure of this parameter indicating the parameters is, of course, algorithm dependent. And right now we are pointing at a new registry that we have defined, in fact, in this draft. So one of the points about this is if it's instead better to have this registry defined somewhere else, and in particular in COSI-BIS. And that would require also a COSI policy to specify for every signature algorithm the corresponding parameters and structures they're supposed to have. Also, there was a long discussion, especially between Jim and John, about at least integrity protecting additional information, especially the group ID that is used as context ID in Grupo Score, essentially including it together possibly with other information in the external EAD. There were, in fact, some corner cases attack where it was possible to forge messages, still signing them in a valid way and injecting them into the wrong group. So the conclusion was that the possible way to address this would be to include also the value of the score option as additional parameter of the external EAD, and essentially they'll solve the problem. We also relaxed a bit the initial statements about error handling, just in case messages are not validated, was supposed to be a must to not reply with error messages, just to not congest the group. Now it's just recommended, so that in the end the final decision is left to the application. And also an adversary can in principle try to fool the server with messages just for the sake of let the server create a recipient context, then the message failed validation, but what to do with the recipient context itself. And well, it's left again to the application about destroying that recipient context or keeping it just in case it's not malevolently triggered error, and so on. Also, we added a kind of handling on the client side against possible replies of responses in this case, because to be consistent with 7390, of course, the client has to retain the token for a given amount of time during which responses can come. But under the assumption that only one response at most per server is expected to the same request, the client should be able to detect possible replications, malevolent or not. So the approach we suggest here, at least, is to have on the client a per request list with a recipient IDs that has produced a valid response, and then that list is flushed the moment the token value is just to be discarded. We had also a number of pull requests. This was from Peter. That was also, I think, clarified with offline discussion during the meeting. Was mostly about some conventional names, especially for parameters in the external EAD. We also had other two issues open right before the meeting, I guess, by John. One is still open for discussion. There was already some discussion in the list about what are the good counter-signature algorithms to support, and especially the one mandatory to implement that right now is an Edward curve. Mostly thinking about trading off speed of computation against size of the signature and so on. So in the past, we got good feedback actually from manufacturers that it was good to mandate implementation of the Edward curve, also to push for hardware implementations. But well, we can still rediscuss that. Otherwise, support in general, personally, I think the broader the better. Also, there was another discussion, especially between John and Jim, that we catched up right before the meeting, and especially during the hackathon, about some use cases that were not specifically addressed in the use case appendix we have, two of which especially involve the presence of a possible gateway as an entry point to a domain otherwise isolated. Conclusions were that use case A here in particular can just work with Drupal core, but is not explicitly related to that, while use case B is good to have, justifies even more the presence of a signature right outside everything, so that can be validated by this even untrusted intermediary. And we are thinking to have this use case at one more explicitly covered in use case appendix. Implementation-wise, to the best of our knowledge, there are 3 ongoing from Rise, from Peter, and from Jim. And during the hackathon, we had some early tests, especially between the one from Rise and the one from Jim. There was an actual exchange of Drupal core protected messages, the request sent over multicast, signature included. Now we have to fix some thing left open in the external EAD. So I think as a next step, we can definitely consider a more serious interop with test cases. Speaking of next steps, this is also about closing a number of open points that I also mentioned before, based on feedback we can have hopefully today already or in the list, and extend security and privacy considerations that we have a little bit postponed so far. Otherwise, we wonder also if there are any other significant issues left that we have been missing so far, and then we hope for interops at the next round, at least with 3 or more implementations. So the rest of the time was intended mostly for discussions on the open points, especially the 2 about additional integrity protections, the registry possibly to be moved to COSI bis, or other points I mentioned before.
Okay, I'm Carsten Bormann. I'm too lazy to go to that microphone. On the mandatory to implement issue, so 255.19 it is?
Right now, yes.
So I think that's a decision we should make very, very, very consciously. 7252 says the mandatory to implement curve is P256. We have a few other curves, but I don't know anyone who has implemented the longer ones. So for anybody who is using DTLS in this space, it's P256. And now this, of course, doesn't depend on DTLS at all. So maybe this is indeed the first place where we can say, okay, let's make the jump. But of course, there is a certain implication that people who somehow have trouble migrating from P256 to 255.19 also are kind of stuck with DTLS. I think we have to be a little careful how we divide this field here. I don't have a specific recommendation at all, but again, I think we should do this in a very conscious way.
Agree.
John Mattsson. Yeah, I think the main trade-offs is, as you say, P256 is already deployed. It's easy to find libraries for that. The main benefits of Curve 25519 is speed. And on the list, there has been some proponents for P256, but Marco told me now that before some of the people that has been interested in using group OSCORE has been keen on using Curve 25519 because of its speed. But I think this needs more discussion and more data to illustrate the trade-offs.
So you just expanded the Rift a little bit by saying, okay, that DTLS world over there, that's still using P256, and the new OSCORE world, that's all 25519. Is this how it would, of course, you can always implement something else, but I mean, from the MTI side here, from the mandatory implement side here, is that going to be the split?
I don't know if Group OSCORE would keep Curve 25519, then it's definitely different algorithms. Yeah, but
what about Unicast OSCORE?
Unicast OSCORE, that doesn't require any asymmetric crypto.
No, but at some point there will be setup protocols and so on. So,
yeah,
I mean, in that ecosystem,
I agree. It's a bigger thing. Yeah, it would be good to have. I think what we're missing is requirement from user. What kind of latency do they need in software and hardware? I don't know. I think that's kind of missing.
Okay, so it looks like this is a good subject for another hallway discussion. Thank you. I think you're up next as well.
Yes, Marco Tiloca from Rise Again. This is a draft we presented the first time in Bangkok, so it was subject to a double update. Just to recap, think about a just deployed device that doesn't really know anything, and in particular how to join OSCORE security group through the intended group manager. There's even a corner case when you may deploy the device very in advance, even before the group manager is deployed or the OSCORE groups have been created. So we are essentially proposing a way for a deployed device to use the resource directory in order to find essentially the OSCORE groups to join. And the group manager responsible for the OSCORE group is supposed to register its join resource on the resource directory, so that a client joining node can retrieve the link at the group manager to talk to that join resource and then join the group. This approach is not limited but consistent to the approach to join OSCORE groups that we have in the ACE document. And this is about performing a resource lookup. So as I said, the join resource of the group manager is registered as a resource of the group manager in the resource directory, and the joining client can retrieve that link together with possible attributes representing additional information to join the group, in particular the group ID. There was a double update, as I said, from version 0, covering mostly two aspects. One was, as we already anticipated in Bangkok, aligning this approach with the way now the resource directory document treats groups, and also considering feedback from an interim discussion we had in January and comments we got about this from Jim and Francesca. The main changes are, as I said, aligning this with the RD group usage pattern now in the resource directory, and clarifying something mostly coming from Jim about confusions between the two concepts of groups we are using here. So we consider both application groups as a collection of devices sharing a common pool of resources, and this is essentially defined as is in the resource directory document. And instead of OSCORE security groups, whose members all share common key material to communicate securely using OSCORE. I have a picture summarizing this in the next slide. We have renamed a parameter from OSCORE GP to AppGP, and that's what we actually meant in the first version with that. It's supposed to be the name of an application group It doesn't have to do necessarily with OSCORE or security groups. Also, as Jim requested, we clarified how to use the parameters and their semantics. And of course, we updated the examples in the document. This is the picture summarizing how we intended to use application groups and security groups differently, and now the updated version is essentially aligned to this. So in the context of a multicast domain, you can have, for instance, 2 security groups here, and you can have 2 application groups using the first security group, and another application group using a totally different security group, so in terms of key material. And as you can see, a same security group can be used in principle by multiple application groups, as long as they have their resources partitioned. But a single application group is instead related to a single security group. Having said that, we updated the examples. As I say, I can quickly go to one of the most important ones. Fundamentally, the approach is unchanged anywhere. Here you have, first of all, the group manager registering itself and one of its joint resources at the resource directory. And especially, you can see in the payload, it specifies, among other things, the OSCORE group ID and the name of the application group associated to this security group. That can actually be a list. AppGP can appear multiple times. The same value can appear once only, of course. So after this registration comes the actually joining client that, in this case, we have assumed it knows only the name of the application group it wants to join. So group 1 doesn't know anything else, especially the group ID of the OSCORE group, the pointer to the joint resource at the group manager, and the multicast IP address used to communicate in that application group. So that's the first query performed to the resource directory, specifying the name of the application group. In return, there's almost everything, not yet everything. This response includes, in particular, a pointer to the join request at the group manager, framed in red, and the group ID, framed in blue. The join device is still missing the multicast IP address used in the group that we say doesn't know in advance. For that, it needs to perform a second lookup, just as described in Appendix A of the resource directory document, this time using the same name, group 1, the name of the application group, as value of the endpoint lookup parameter. And this time the response includes, just as per the resource directory document, the multicast IP address used in this application group as base parameter. So to summarize the updates, we're about aligning this approach with the RD group usage pattern now, considering the resource directory, and making clear distinctions since the introduction about what we mean with OSCORE security groups, in this case, and application groups, just as per the resource directory. We updated the parameter description, their semantics, and the examples consistently. There are 2 open points still, mostly from Jim's comments. Of course, it would be good to register the 2 parameters we are introducing, OSCORE GID and AppGP. Question is where? Because the best venue would be a link target attributes registry, but there is no such registry. So I don't know what we should do about this, if we should create the registry, where? And the other open point is, Jim, of course, suggested that in principle, this approach can be broader, can be generalized to address discovery groups, not only OSCORE groups, thinking, for instance, of topics for PubSub. I think in principle it's possible, but we would like to see how the PubSub activities develop, also in terms of security, before considering that too in this document or in another document. I don't know. Other than this, we need reviews or more reviews. Please.
I'm Prasad. It seems we have found some use case for resource directory that is a bit beyond what was the resource directory intended for. But according to your slides, it seems to work.
Okay.
What is a bit funky in your slides is the use of link format, like discovering addresses from base URLs and things like that.
You mean this step?
Yeah.
This is just from the resource directory.
It looks weird.
This is not new from our document.
I think that part needs a bit of review.
Okay.
And one problem we have indeed with link format is that the extensibility story is a bit thin. So as you say, there's no registry for link target attributes and so on. And one thing I tried to improve with Coral as a potential replacement for link format is to solve this extension story. So one interesting exercise might be how would you do the same thing but using Coral instead, and then see if it solves your problems with the link format.
We haven't talked about that, honestly.
Christian Amses, I agree that this use of looking into attribute values is a bit weird, and I would like to have all the information that is passed around here at all points in time as you rise in links. But the lookup that was established in 6690 with respect to what can you query from link format does not lend itself to working with the structures as you and I probably would prefer to have them. And so this is something that stays in the style of link format. And yes, we would probably want to express that differently when we have a format with which we can follow through links hop by hop more easily. So if you maybe could go back a slide, if that were represented even with the, that one, even with Coral as one idea of how the coral reef could look like, then that would be a link from the registration resource to the kind of base address of the device.
I don't claim to fully understand this example. I'm just seeing that you're apparently discovering a multicast IP address by extracting it from a URL, which is a base URL, and that looks weird to me.
I'd love to see the example in Coral as well. Yeah, I'm just not sure how well that works with the time scale. I mean, it's something that we should look into, but at the same time, it's something where I don't see how the time scales could easily align.
It's Peter van der Stok. The discussion about Coral or link format is very interesting, of course, but I don't know about the timeline of Coral. Will it be here tomorrow or in 10 years' time? We don't know.
If you send a review by tomorrow, it's done by the day after.
Well, actually, we're only discussing it here on Friday.
Yes, but not standardized.
So, Peter, before you go, when do you want this stuff to be published?
Oh, may you go back to my lawyers? Well, next year will be good.
Good. Yeah, if there are no comments anymore, the obvious question is who has read a version of this document? Who has read the most recent version? So I think we have a little bit of a review problem still, but given that this is starting to converge, maybe now would be a good time to actually start reading it and thinking about whether we want to work on this as a working group item. So it is kind of weird, as Klaus said. We are moving away from link format on one end, and on the other end we are pushing more link format. But maybe that's just the result of the timescales.
If link format works here, it's fine with me to use the link format. I'm not against that. I'm just looking at these examples, and they look like they make use of weird link format in even more weirder ways. And that needs review.
I see. Thanks.
Good. So who would be willing to review this or the next version of the document? That's still not that many people.
How many counts?
Jim, Klaus, Bill, Carsten. Okay. Okay, so let's go to the next document, which is yours again.
Marco again. This is the last one. There was some discussion with a few people in Bangkok already, and we thought it was good to start this document as essentially an update to 7390 for a number of reasons. 7390 was published, 2013 now, and considering only the COP functionalities that were available at the time, where there was no security mechanism for groups available, and it ended up published as an experimental document. It actually started as informational and then became experimental later on in the very final steps of the ISG review, if you look back at its history. In the meanwhile, since then, a number of things have changed, especially new functionalities for co-op brought forward, like Blockwise and Observe above all. At least feedback I got, especially from ESCO, the first author, seems the long description for the RESTful interface in 7390 is not really used by anyone apparently. So that's something that can be just forgotten or not included in a normative document, so to say. Plus now we have GrupoScore with intent to provide security in group contexts. Also, we realized that practically the GrupoScore document here definitely builds in a normative way of N7390, but since that's an experimental document, we just have to refer it in an informative way that we are doing now. But it would just be better to build normatively on a standard Struct document instead. So putting all these motivations together, and after early feedback inside meeting after Bangkok, we started the document, with the goal essentially to produce a new standard Struct RFC as an update to 7390 and to refer to 7390 as much as possible. So try to re-include more or less verbatim of revised, only things that are really important to stress as must, essentially. This would also support work that follow the experiment documented by 7390, and you can especially see that Californium has recently started to support also group co-op as per 7390 since end of last year, I think. You can also find an OCF implementation in Go supporting co-op over multicast. So the scope of this document is actually focused on updated or newer use cases that make sense for group co-op in a much more compact way than in 7390. Possible new co-op functionalities developed and released after 7390. Both unsecure and secure co-op, and if there is security, there is GrupoScore. Quick principles for mostly configuring and maintaining secure communications. I quickly browse on the table of content. We start with a number of use cases in a much more compact way than the 7390. Then we focus on the use of co-op and such, so the creation and maintenance of co-op groups as network groups and how it is used. And here we have a number of specific subsections that are still to be defined for the next version. Also, we treat a special Observe because in the Observe RFC, nothing is said about multicast. But in 7390, it is said explicitly, Observe is supposed to work on multicast. So we are essentially reintroducing it for the sake of observation requests that can be sent over multicast as well. So we are explicitly allowing that here, and that's why formally we are also intended to update 7641 as well about this. But it's essentially about observing the same resource over multicast, multiple servers that are sharing it. We treat the no-sec mode for non-critical use cases when that is doable. That's essentially like in 7390. But we have a fairly good amount of text already for the secure case when you essentially use GrupoScore. And we recommend the related document in ACE for the sake of group joining and key management. We have, of course, a number of security considerations, both for the no-sec case, essentially do it at your own risk if you know what you're doing. And for the case, you go for GrupoScore when you want security in the groups, and we describe point-to-point. We essentially reprise what discussed in 7390, how this essentially tackles and addresses a number of security attacks that you have in groups if you have unsecure communication with group co-op. As next steps, well, we need to actually complete the document because there are a few sections still TBD. We would like to have feedback if, based on the current table of content, we are missing any fundamental point that should be included in this document. And otherwise, whatever you find is right there is totally readable for early comments and reviews. That would be mostly welcome.
So who has read RFC 7390? And who has seen this attempt at a revision? Oh, that's more than the discovery document. Okay, so who would be willing to review this? Klaus, Jim, Klaus and Jim. That may be a bit thin again. Christian, oh, when Christian volunteers, it's going to happen. Okay, good. So, yeah, what's your timeline with this?
Definitely to complete the document for the next ITF meeting.
Uh-huh.
Then let's see if that's enough to take more formal actions with that, or we need one more round with formal reviews. It depends a bit of the group.
Matthias Kovac, just a quick question. You mentioned network groups now. How do they relate to the app groups that you introduced previously?
Right. Here we're using network groups like in 7390 already. So these groups should include only the co-op endpoints acting as servers. So the network group is a subset of the application group. The way it is defined here, we are keeping the same definition of 7390.
Thomas Fossati also is willing to review the 7390 bis.
Thank you, Thomas.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's go.
Okay, really quick summary of the PubSub and multicast discussion that happened during the hackathon. Some people were there, so I put the list. I might have forgotten someone. So the background and the motivation for this discussion is that we realize we have multicast and we have Observe and we have PubSub. And we would like to use something like multicast notification in a PubSub scenario. This seems like a good thing to have for efficiency. And once we have that, we also would like to have some security mechanism to protect communication, such as publication protection, mechanism to protect against nodes that are not subscribers getting unwillingly subscribed, and so denial of service, and also authorization and authentication of nodes. So this started from the work in ACE for the PubSub co-op PubSub profile, and realized, okay, there is more than can be done, and possibly might also fit in core. So during this side meeting, we identified 3 challenges. The first one is the plumbing, which is how to make the PubSub architecture work with multicast delivery of notifications. And because of the way notifications are defined right now as responses, the current multicast wouldn't work with that. The second point is how to protect against these denial of service attacks. And then more broadly, how to protect the communication. So there's a publisher broker, publisher subscriber, subscriber broker, and provide authentication authorization for the nodes. So this is some work that is starting now, and it would fit both in ACE and core in some sense, since the PubSub and the observe is done, and the multicast is done here, and security in ACE. Yes, question?
In your security model, did you include anything about inference? So if inference, so as an attacker, can I infer something about another node because I'm part of the multicast group and I see that this other node is receiving some notifications? Is that included in the security model?
We were not that far yet. We're just starting this discussion.
Okay.
So the answer will be no right now, but...
Could you let us know your name, please?
Oh, Dave Wheeler.
Yeah. And so, yeah, there is the slides that we used at the hallway meeting that have more detailed of what exactly was discussed and how this was presented, which I'm not going to go through, but please take a look at those and see if they make any sense. And if you want to participate, let's pick it up. Yeah. Yes.
You can quickly say something about your slide number 10.
About?
Your slide number 10.
Slide number 10. Yeah, the one, the performance goal, multicasting notifications, that's what I already said about being more efficient, and security, setting up many broker subscriber DTLS connection is not really optimal.
What kind of work do we have to do to make this happen?
Well, first of all, what I would like to know is, where does this fit? Does it fit here? Does it fit in ACE? Somewhere else? Are people interested? From the reaction I got from starting this hallway discussion, it seemed that people were interested in this. So this is more a question to the chairs, core and ACE, and ORID.
Matthias Kovac, just comes to mind. We had these unsolicited notifications. We discussed this with OCF. I have no clue where that went and what's the status about this, but this could be probably something that goes together and was already identified as something that we could work on.
Okay.
Alexei Melnikov as AD, I don't have an answer for you, but if you send email to me, then I can talk to security ADs and we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Or we'll give you an answer saying, one of the working groups need to reach out to maybe, so I don't know.
Okay.
If chairs or you can send me a reminder, we'll have a look.
Okay. Thank you, Francisco. So, amazingly, we are ahead of schedule. Ari.
Let's stop arguing about something.
Yeah, I think the thing we should argue about is whether we need a CNML working group.
Alrighty, before we go for a CNML working group, let's talk about one CNML draft. So this is about the data value content format indication. It's a new draft, but it's already in the version 01 since we got a bunch of good comments before the IETF. Long story short, today the CNML records, they can contain arbitrary binary data values. There's the VD field for that. And how it was specified in the original spec is that the information, how you actually decode these values, is established out of band. That's part of your application. So you can have, if you don't have use for the regular strings in Boolean values, the rest you can basically put in the VD field. So there you can see in the example how it looks like. There you have 3 records. First one is using a classic P value. Second one is using a Boolean, but the third record, this NFC reader, has now an arbitrary binary value out of it. So that's why we envisioned everyone would be using this, just sending a few bits and bytes of information using the VD value. Turned out that there's a lot of use for that even beyond. We see now currently rather substantial amount of information put there, which actually does have structure. And for structured information at the IETF, we do have a way to express that. That's the media types and in particular content formats when we use in the core environment. So our proposal here is simply, well, let's add a content format indication to records which have the VD value to indicate what is the value there. Then you don't need necessarily have that much out-of-band negotiation there. And also third parties that do see these records can make something out of that information instead of just being completely blind what's being exchanged. So here's an example how it would look like right before, similar kind of record, but we add this new field CT and equals 60 here. And for those of you who can decode base 64 and CBOR in your head, it's probably already obvious. We do have here a CBOR array that contains a string and an integer inside, and it's base 64 encoded in the example because this is the JSON format. If you're using the CBOR format, you would use the binary value as such in the field. And then because the CT value tells us it's 60, it should be rather easy to decode that. That's the core of the proposal. Then it gets slightly more complicated. So we got feedback that would be highly useful, perhaps to also support for media types that do not have these content format indications. So with Core, you can, of course, easily register for any kind of media types, but there might be some media types and their parameterized versions that maybe don't make sense in the Core environment or CoAP. And ZenML, of course, can be used much wider context than just CoAP. So a proposal would be to extend this and have also possibility, instead of using the CT, to also use content type and content coding fields to tell the same information in a string format for those types that you don't have a CoAP content format registered. So you see an example for that in the bottom. So you would have content type, for example, text CSV, and it could be using gzip content coding. And if you're interested what is the results there, you can do base64 and gunzip. So this seems to be a rather reasonable approach for solving this. Although we did hit one interesting challenge that we just realized yesterday. With this extra way of two ways of defining this and content coding information, since you have also the base values in ZenML, and for those who are not familiar with ZenML, you have base fields and regular fields, and usually the base fields are applied for those records that don't define any field of that kind. That makes it easier to compress information. You don't have to repeat same information in every single record. So we are proposing to register base fields for all of these three different ways to express this information. However, in this case, you probably should not be mixing both the content format and the content type and content coding fields, because they essentially can tell the same piece of information. So we may need to come up with a way to undo a base content type or content coding information, because now you have the dependency that you, for example, define base content type in the beginning, but then you want to, for example, combine this with another ZenML pack, which is using the other format. And instead of changing all those fields together, you want to switch that format, but you don't want to be reusing the same base CT value for the following records. So that's maybe the bigger challenge that we have. The basic format looks pretty simple and a straightforward thing for us to do. For this, we may need to do a bit more thinking, but if we end up extending ZenML in this kind of ways also in the future, this could be a pattern that we want to establish. How can you basically undo a base value? But for that, I think there's two quick questions. Does the group think this makes sense? So I see some nodding there. And whether it makes sense to go all the way here. So we got some feedback, especially for those who are using in non-constrained space. This seems to be a very useful construct. And if we say yes to both 2, how do we solve number 3? So we have one, let's say, tentative proposal that, for example, if there's both CT wins but you can nullify the CT by setting it to -1, we can see a dozen different ways of doing that, which that may not be the optimal one. But that was all of it.
Okay, while I was sitting here, I came up with a sick way of solving this problem. In CoAP, we only have non-negative content format numbers. Why don't we provide a way to define negative content format numbers within a SNML pack? And then we don't have a problem. But I'll explain that to you later on.
What numbers?
Negative content format numbers. So you would have a record that says -7 is, what was that? Text CSV plus content coding gzip. And then in the following, you can switch back and forth between -7 and 60 to all your delight.
Okay, and those who are now getting super worried, are we extending this way too long? The good thing, this is stuff you don't have to understand. So these are not mandatory to understand fields. So for a system that doesn't care, it's just like, yeah, whatever. But system that wants to make use of this piece of information can actually look in there. And the first format, this is pretty much straightforward. The question is here and here, how far do we want to push? But yeah, this is already being used out there. So I think doing this in this group, in my opinion, would make a lot of sense. But I'll leave the call for that up to the chairs.
Yeah, Klaus brought up the meta issue. If we have all these tiny SNML documents being generated here, isn't that becoming a bit fragmented for the users? And maybe that's a good reason to have another hallway meeting on how to handle this. But right now, I think Core is the working group that's owning SNML, and if people out there have small things they want to have added, we probably should be doing that so they don't have to invent them on their own and possibly mess them up in the process. So has anybody read this? Klaus has read it. I cannot raise my hand. I'm a co-author, but I haven't read the newest version. Okay, so that's certainly a problem. I mean, some people from the Riot project have implemented this stuff, so maybe this is one of the places where we have to work harder on actually getting the implementer in the loop. Okay, can you do the next one as well? No, you can't. You can start talking.
Okay, so the next one, more SNML units. Actually, it's not my draft; it's Karsten's draft. But I was the one poking Karsten that, hey, this should be done. So the background on this SNML units is that SNML has a units registry that you can use in any of the records to say, hey, this information is of this kind of unit, and you can think of it as a semantic tag telling more context about the value there. So in the OMA SpecWorks, we are working on this like with M2M protocol and IPSO models. And also those IPSO models, they have in resources, they have a unit attribute. It's optional there, but those where it makes sense, you can actually define in the specification what is the unit of this value. And some objects even have a unit resource, so you can dynamically configure what kind of unit that kind of an object is using for its value. It turns out currently there is no registry for the unit, so we were looking at what is the right way to have this more consistent. And well, it turns out the SNML unit register seems like a good fit for this purpose. And it is also a good fit for the reason that the SNML JSON CBOR is already used as the serialization format for live with M2M objects. So having those units aligned there would make interoperability and translations in general easier. However, there has been quite some time already new objects and resources registered for the OMA registry, and there are some units that are used there that are not currently part of the CENML units registry. In particular, there is byte, voltampere reactive, and joules per meter, and also degrees as in compass direction. In the CENML document, when we were creating the registry, we were expressly saying that, okay, it should be one unit for the one kind of a thing you are expressing. We do already have, for example, bit for information content. So the question is like, should we still also register byte? On the other hand, we had the similar discussion on the Kelvin and Celsius. Even Kelvin is like the one ISO spec is perhaps slightly more strongly recommended. They also ISO specs do recommend, do mention using Celsius as a temperature unit. So with bit and bytes, byte is much more commonly used in certain contexts for information content. Perhaps it makes sense to have along the same analogy also byte there. So all in all, it seems at the moment the analysis is still ongoing. If we register these missing units for CENML, we could be using the same registry for the IPSO. We don't need to come up with a new registry, new ways to do that. And of course, the good thing is that also does support all other use of CENML. So this is nothing IPSO specific. Those units are universal. So anywhere where you would use CENML in IPSO context or outside, you could be using the same units. So we are actually serving both communities at once. So there's a draft for it that we don't have to make it an RFC to do the registrations for IANA because it's just expert approval for it. But of course, we could be collecting more of these kind of units in this draft over the time and eventually published as an RFC.
Hey, Hauke Peterson. Just have a question about the units. I just recently saw in the Bluetooth standard they have like a 15-page long table of units. Is there any chance we can have some conversions there?
That was one of the registries that was being considered for the IPSO one. The one that we actually need here is this short string on it. The Bluetooth one had, I think it was integers, or anyway, they had numbers for it. Here we actually do need short strings, so there was a bit of a mismatch. And then there was also the question of the registry control. If we come up, let's say in the IPSO context, with a new unit that is not in the registry, but Bluetooth doesn't seem used for it. However, the IPSO use and CENML use are very well aligned already, so we see a bit more natural fit there. The other one that was considered was the UCUM registry of units. But actually, in CENML, one of the implied policies there is that if it's in UCUM, we can actually easily fit in there. There are also some things in UCUM we actually may not want to be. It's a rather rich set of units, and some stuff we may not want to have there. But also, it's missing some. So now I don't remember which one of these units, but some of them actually did not exist there, but they are still widely used in, for example, ISO specs. So it seems to be a right thing to have it there. But long term, actually, one thing what we have on the agenda is to have the chat with the UCUM guys and see like how we can have alignment in this space all together.
This is Matthias. So in terms of convergence, I also wanted to hint at this UCUMBERG. I mean, that was something that was picked in the very, very early days of Core, actually, to be something of interest, but it somehow never progressed. I learned that the semantic sensor network ontology, they also now aligned with the UCUM system. And there's even some activity going on that there's a Java implementation. There is, I think, even a Java extension, so something that should end up in the JDK at some point, where you can then automatically basically resolve the different units and get the actual value in the target dimension that you want. So it can also work with the weights. Sorry, I currently don't know what's the proper term for this kilo, mega, and so on.
Scales.
Yeah, the scales, scale factors, and so on, and then also converting between equivalent kind of units. And there is some work going on to do this automatically. Okay. So this is quite interesting for machine to machine, where you always have to make sure that there is something that can actually match the units that are actually compatible, but because you use a different string, they are not.
Yes, and actually that's something we were discussing in the context of SOMA SpecWorks, like what's the right place to express the scale. If you have it in the numeric value, then like comparisons become trivial. You don't actually have to look at the unit. But then luckily there are some environments that don't support floats very well. So if you don't have a floating point implementation, it might be harder for you. However, for example, both in the JSON and CBOR format, there's an easy way to go around that, where you can just use the exponent. So basically, you use your value as such, but you define the exponent in a way that it actually matches your scale. So if it's a kilo, you just put there are 3. If it's a mega, or if it's a micro, you put minus 9, etc. So there is a way around that without doing floating point operations, actually. But the good point about the UCOM on the Java part, that's something interesting to have a look at. And also I heard they are doing, I think, alignment with QUDT. So there's some wider alignment activity going on there. And yeah, we have it on our list to actually have a closer look at that.
Yeah, I think these different registries are an interesting way to learn how different efforts can differ in their objectives. So UCOM is pretty much trying to be the collection of the most obscure things you can think about. They have about a half dozen of definitions of British thermal units, because over time British thermal units have changed a little bit. I mean, this is something that you have to know. Some things like inch had a different definition 70 years ago than they have today. So if you still have a map that is based on the old one, then you may want to use this unit. This is not quite what we need for the Internet of Things. So there we can actually favor a style of doing things that's actually based on the base units that are internationally accepted. So the CENMA units registry actually tries to be minimal. So we have a joule per meter, but we don't have a watt-hour per kilometer, because one is just the other one times 3.6 millions. And that, of course, simplifies working with the stuff, but it also means that if you have a sensor that happens to output watt-hours per kilometer, then you have to do some work. And so when people say, oh, UCOM is so big, let's adopt it, yeah, it's big in a way that maybe we don't like. And also I was really surprised to find out they didn't have volt amperes and volt amperes reactive in there, which is very strange if you come from IoT power meter kind of environment where this is standard fare. Yeah, the problem is that the IETF is not in that business. So we would be much happier if we could just factor this out to someone else. And the group that is closest here is incredibly ISO. They have ISO 80,000 and the IEC parts of ISO 80,000. But it still needs to be translated into ASCII. And that's the small piece of work that we probably have to do. Okay, next item. So, Ivailo, do you want to talk about CoreConf, or is anybody else doing that?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Ivailo Petrov, and I will be presenting the advancement of CoreConf. So, okay, I will start, and I guess I will have my slides in a moment. I mean,
oh, interesting. Stop talking.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so first about Komai draft, there were no real changes since the last IETF, And the last ITF, there was interop between different implementations. So it seems that the draft is rather stable. And for me, once we resolve the issues with the seed draft and the YANG-CBOR draft, we can go for working group last call. Anyone disagreeing? Okay.
That's maybe the question you should ask at the end. That's maybe the question you should ask at the end.
Okay, so next part. Okay, I mean, I can start with the seed draft, which is actually maybe the more interesting part of the presentation, and then I will come back to the YANG-CBOR draft. So for the seed draft, we received quite extensive review and comments from Peter, so thank you, Peter. We tried to adapt the draft accordingly. And then we had, it was yesterday, a lot of discussions with people from IANA. There are a lot of things we would like to simplify due to those discussions. Right now, it seems that the draft is a little bit still difficult to understand. So a lot of the changes are editorial, but there are some non-editorial changes. So, okay. Okay, let me just go to the appropriate slide. Okay. So, okay. A lot of things are being moved from the introduction and from the seed life cycle section to appendix, because they were just informational and explaining how things could happen for getting a seat assigned to some YANG mod, a number of seats assigned to some YANG module. But as this is not the only way and it might bring some confusion to people, we decided to move them to appendix. This includes the automatic generation and the seat lifecycle part. Another quite important part from the modifications, I would say, is the change of the seat ranges 0 to 999. I mean, some of the seat ranges that right now were not very clear how we want to handle them for the IANA managed repository are now being reserved for future use. So they will need to be unblocked at a later stage when we know a little bit more how we want to use the seats from this smaller, the seats with those smaller numbers. We don't want to risk doing something suboptimal and regretting that in the future. And there was a section 5 that was informational, but it could lead, we decided that it could lead to some more confusion, so we just removed it. So I think this is everything here. Okay, that's fun. Okay, so next, yeah, I think I should have checked the PDF that was generated. Okay, so the next thing was that the seat type was defined in the Komai YANG module, which was kind of redundant. So what we decided was to move it on the to the seat YANG module. It was also requested approximately at the same time on the mailing list, so this is a good thing. I mean, it means that people agree with our decision. Another point, which is also quite important, I would say, is that instead of creating a new repository where seed files are added, we are attaching the seed files to the Yang name registry. And so this has been discussed with Ayana. There were some details to be cleared out about this, but it is the way we plan to go. Okay, I see that we have some comments here.
It's Michelle Cotton with Ayana. You don't know this because we were just talking about it back there, but we might actually change where we post the SID files. It might not actually go into the Yang module registry for various different reasons that we've been talking about back there. So that might be something that changes. So we'll talk more about it. And if there's a change, obviously the draft will get updated and then everybody can provide their feedback. But just wanted to let you know that.
Okay, so I will see what I will present the rest of the time then. But hopefully some of the other things that I will be presenting will not be wrong.
So Alexander here. So just to get everything clear, basically what we did was really simplify all the things, and it was super interesting talking with the people from Ayana, because things that look really obvious when you talk on the process and how things are working with Ayana, because they are the guys that will actually be running the thing that we defined here. And they're like, okay, here that's really a great idea, but how do we do whenever you have like an RFC required and then later you need... So we are getting really down into the process of how things get registered. And even things that look super straightforward, when you put on the process on top, we say, okay, well, there might be some little modification to do. But it was really impressive, the progress that we have. So we are basically fine-tuning some of the things. And this is when we were like talking, and with Carsten we were talking a little bit earlier, and we basically said, okay, well, we agree it will work, and we need just to define that little thing over here. And so that was the reason for that, and sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, sure. I would just need to revert a couple of commits, but otherwise it's fine.
So I think the complexity here comes from the fact that we have different stakeholders. We have the people who actually want to write these modules. We have the people who actually want to find those modules. We have Ayana. And in the first two groups, we actually have two subgroups, which are the people that we are actually working for, that want to do this for the constraint space. But there are other people who want to use CBOR encoding and the efficient form of CBOR encoding, and they have much larger and many more Yang files and so on, and to support that constituency as well, which of course increases the availability of software to do all this. So it's also in our interest. We have to be able to scale up more than we initially thought. So this is the reason why this is getting a little bit more complicated than we thought. So this is one part. Are you going to say something about Yang CBOR as well?
So yeah, there is, okay, for example here. So yeah, for Yang CBOR, what I can say that it's rather stable. The only thing is that like on Saturday or something like that, we received some comments, very valuable reviews, but the input was it's all great, but there is one thing like multiple enums inside the union that currently is not handled like very clearly. Different implementations might get different results, which is not something we would want. So now the question is, how do we resolve this? Proposition that Carsten made was to have seats assigned to values in enums. Yeah, to me personally, that sounded as a good idea. The only thing was to assign the complexity of. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a small comment. So the point is that the Yang to CBOR is really getting interest. So people are from different communities are really looking into it now, and the feeling that I get is that when Yang was made and the encoding in XML and JSON, they were actually quite permissive. So people were doing stuff that were not really well defined, like having these enum things. So you send just a string that says 0, and the other end just tries to figure out, okay, well, is this 0 from the first enum or for the second enum or for the third enum? And right now they figured out that, well, that poses problems in some cases, and they want to solve it well in the Yang to CBOR. They want to have something deterministic. So this is where it gets really interesting, because we need to answer some questions that arise after the Yang community operated things.
Yeah, in Germany we call this corpses in the basement. The problem we're having is that a while ago we decided we don't need multiple unions inside unions. That's not really something that constraint devices are interested in. So we decided to just not solve the problem. And now again, what has happened is that the RESTconf people have found out that having a CBOR representation for their interchange would make their server so much faster. So they want to use it. And again, it is in our interest, at least I believe that. Maybe you see that differently. It is in our interest to have these communities on board, so we get much better software support than if this were done only for the OT space. So we know that this is, from our point of view, done, and we push it out and ask the Yang community to review it. We notice they actually want to use it as well, and they are actually interested in making the corner cases of Yang actually work. And the most interesting part of this debate is that there already is a difference between XML and JSON encoding that has been glossed over. So we would be different yet again, but maybe in a slightly more destructive way. So it's probably worth fixing this, and I have no idea what will happen about this annotations support. Are you going to say something about that?
So for the annotations, I still haven't looked into them. I mean, obviously we would love to find a good solution for that. As you said, the wider the adoption, the better it is for us. But so far I don't have a solution that's worth mentioning. Okay, Alex has a comment.
So actually, I'll have a question to the chairs. How do we proceed with the Yang to CBOR? Do we can leave it open until the people from the Yang community, they bring up new questions and we find solution to adapt to that? Or do we have like a catch-all phrase saying, well, this is the way it will be working, Yang to CBOR v1. We try to freeze it, and then whenever you're going to have if you have new things to add, there will be a revision in V2 in 1 year, and at least we can focus on something.
Yeah, that's a good question. One important thing here, of course, is if we come up with any solutions that would require us to change the SID files, we better have that now. So that those may be much harder to change than anything else. Apart from that, if we can stick with the same SID files, yes, we might have a partial solution. I think it's a bit of a perception whether this is just a tiny thing we have to fix here, or a major thing that has to be added to make it work. And I think we're still in the process of finding out which of the two actually is the case. So I don't really have the answer here. Last time we said we're ready to working with us call all this, except that we haven't done the interoperability testing that we wanted to have done. How much further are we on that line?
We are late on the interoperability. I mean, we did the interoperabilities like a year ago, and things were working. Since then, we moved, so we changed some things, and we have not done interop on these new things. So even though it seems straightforward, I cannot say for 100. It's not like running code that we can say, well, the thing is running. So intellectually, it is minor details and simplifications compared to the previous interops that were working. But today we still need to get interop in the sense of two companies working together, or open source implementation working with another open source implementation. So that probably, if we're waiting for this, we'll need to focus on that before the next ITF.
Okay, so one way to parallelize this a little bit would be to get the netconf people involved, and probably the only way we can get them involved is doing a working group plus call. So we could decide to reverse this a little bit and just do a working group plus call to get their attention, and be aware that the interop work might uncover other details, even though I don't think it's very likely it might happen. And there's always a second working group plus call. You haven't heard me said that.
Yeah, I think that we at some point, in Yang keeps changing also. Yeah. So that's the other problem. So it's like a never-ending cycle. So at the end, it's better at some point to say, well, we have done a really great job until now. Everything else, it's like strings. So it's not going to be really efficient, but at least it's going to be behaving in the way that the JSON encoding is working. So that's good for you. And working group plus call, and in case the people from netmods scream really loud that, okay, that doesn't work like this and we need to fix it, we'll fix it, no problem. But at least to have this deadline of, think about this really hard now.
Okay. We had some items on the mailing list, like moving some stuff between the documents and so on, which I think needs to be done before we can do that. So when will the set of documents be ready for such an exercise?
So I thought I had the seed draft ready for new review, but obviously this will still require a little bit more work. Hopefully by the end of the week, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so all the things that I saw on the mailing list, maybe we can go over it once again. All the things that I saw are already in there. So the last reviews with Ayana were really simplification. So moving non-normative text into the appendix. So nothing really changes from there. We just renamed a couple of titles to say, okay, well, this is the location.
Very long answer to a very simple question. When
Sorry,
are you done?
yes. So for me, everything is already done. We just need to the major work is done in the draft that we have. We're going to review it once again, and it will be done by the end of the week.
Okay, so it seems the plan is to actually working plus call this. There is a little detail that we haven't taken care of yet, which is the Yang library document, which isn't even a working group document. So it's a bit hard to do a working group plus call on that. Who in this room has actually read that thing? Vivaldo has read it, and there's another arm where
yeah, this is Dominic.
Dominic
Can as well, and I think Alex, of course. Yeah, Alex as well.
Okay. So does this mean we should be doing an adoption call for that document now? Would be better if there's more than 3 people having read that.
Well, it's Alex. It's a very straightforward document, right? It's just a Yang module saying how do you get information from a device. Like it's a Yang model that tells you how do I get, what are the modules on this device and so forth. So it's really simple and straightforward stuff. And I think the place would be more in core to do this work because we mostly know how to interact with constrained devices. Then in NetMod, it's Yang, like it's basic Yang saying, well, what are the modules there, what are blah, 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 blah. So yeah, you can go and read it if you wish, but for me it's really straightforward and logical continuation of CoreConf.
Okay, so I would expect that there will be a resubmission of that together with the other ones.
Yeah.
And we try to be ready at the end of the week, and maybe there will be a little bit more hallway work going into that.
Okay.
Anything else we can do that on that right now? Good. So we are actually 3 minutes ahead of schedule. So we are in the miscellaneous section. Who has read this document? Of these, who didn't like it? Okay. Should we do this in this working group? See some nodding. Okay, Francesca? Me? +1 in Java. Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's definitely useful and helpful and clarifies things that might have been a bit unclear in the past. Maybe we should make it larger and try to go for a larger IETF audience than just getting consensus in core.
Yeah. So that would be the next step. So one of the important things to get the attention of other people is to not load it down with IoT specific things. So that I wouldn't want to make it larger. I would like to make the community larger that looks at it. So that might indeed be a next step to involve people like HTTP-BIS and so on, and see whether they can live with this document, whether that just stays our terminology or other working groups are actually also interested in this terminology. That's a good point. Okay, I leave it to my co-chair to read this room. Ari?
Ari Keren's quick comment. Yeah, I find it very useful. I see myself going to the document over and over again when I do updates because that terminology is so easy to get wrong. So, and there is no single right or wrong until now, so I'm glad we're doing that.
Thank you.
So basically, if I'm not mistaken, there were about 9 people in the room that have read it, out of which 0 said that it was a bad idea. I hear good positive comments, so maybe we can move it forward, right? All right?
You can't ask me.
Yeah, I mean, anyone else? I mean, now is a good time to voice any disagreements on this. Otherwise, we can do working group adoption already on the mailing list. All right? So then that's it.
Thank you. So then there was this beautiful meeting of the SEC dispatch working group on Monday. Who in this room was there? Okay, so quite a few people followed that. And as you know, people are using X509 certificates for many things, not just the things it was designed for. And many people tell us they really would like to have the flexibility provided by CWTs instead to get their authenticated assertions into their systems. So the question was, can we maybe write up a document that explains how to do that? This is not about standardizing stuff because CWTs and COSI already exist, and this CWT proof of possession document, but it's really about the certificates that we are seeing. How could these be translated into a CWT word? So that's one document we talked about, and I have not pasted in your slides, John, but there's also another document that is for something completely different, except that it actually looks very similar at the end, which is instead of doing something new that solves the same problem, we can, of course, take the existing X509 certificates and well, kind of give them a new paint and re-encode them in CBOR. And the only problem, of course, is that the signature that is in that X509 certificate is computed from an ASN1 representation. So you are sending someone a CBOR representation, and that someone is supposed to convert that back into an X509 specification, X509 document, then compute the fingerprint of that and verify the certificate. So this is a little bit of a wart. The other one is that it does inherit all the semantic baggage and uncertainties of X509, although there is also a component to the effort, which is about profiling X509 itself. So some of that baggage will be taken away. But still, there's some stuff in there that maybe is hard to find out what it actually means. But in any case, it means a constraint device that wants to make use of these certificates would either itself implement ASN1 X509 or would possibly delegate this out to a verifier that does that work for it. So that's related work. That is currently being submitted to ACE, to the ACE working group. The other document that I talked about, that is actually in the core, submitted to the core working group. And now the question is, does that even work? And if we read the charters of the two working groups, the answer is not really. So we had a side meeting about a month ago, mostly powered by the COSI working group chairs, who had been told this might be something that could be done in the COSI working group, and they were vehemently saying, no, that's not something that should be done in the COSI working group. And so we tried to look at what's out there, and came up, there are essentially two candidates that make sense, which are ACE and CORE. ACE because ACE owns CWTs, which also was kind of a very loose fit. I mean, it took a while until we found someone who was willing to do CWTs, and it landed in ACE. And the core work group, on the other hand, has the requirements for getting these assertions. So these were the two groups that kind of came out as the selection of that COSI hallway meeting. Of course, there's also the ability to create another working group or use another existing working group, but there's no obvious candidate for that. And of course, there's also the ability to just not do the work and live with X509 as it is, but most likely people will still be using CWTs for this, and just in a more uncoordinated fashion. So with that, we went into the SecDispatch meeting, and of course everybody started confusing the two efforts, and started thinking we wanted to redo the whole mess that X509 is, and decided redoing that mess needs a buff. And yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. So most likely there will be a buff for doing this, a working group forming buff. And we probably will have a charter proposal and so on. But as the core working group, we are of course interested in making some of this happen and allow using these authenticated assertions in our security mechanisms. So that's the situation we are in. We will have a little bit more delay before we actually can start working on that. And I would be interested in additions from anyone who was there on Monday as well. So who has actually seen one of these two blue documents here, the CoID document or the CBOR certificates document? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. Okay. Good. Who would be willing to contribute to an effort to get another working group going on this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I'm seeing one hand more, and I still arrive at 6.
I said 4. 5. 4.5.
Well, I saw 6. David, Marisha, Jim, Ivaldo, John, Mr. Man. Okay. Good. Anything else we can do on this at the moment? Good. So we are done with this one as well. And now we are in the middle of Friday from the agenda. So we have 9 minutes left. So welcome to Friday. So Jin did the right thing and escaped. So he cannot be talking about speedy block trends. The core applications really need Michael, who cannot make it today, I think. And yeah, the only other thing we could talk about is the resource directory.
I could tell a bit about the kind of resource directory extensions, the optional part, because that's something I don't need slides for.
That will be different from your talk tomorrow, right?
That is something that was scheduled for optional as a part, as an appendix to
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Okay, go ahead. Let's use those 9 minutes.
Could you open resource-directory extensions?
Yes.
And give me the TOC. So hello, this is Christian Amsus on something that was planned for Friday. So the resource directory is in a state where we are now officially in working group last call. And there are some things that came up during the discussions of resource directory that could have been integrated there, but we were already trying to get the number of pages down, and we do have extension mechanisms in resource directory that allow many things to be defined later on. So I started a document in which I'm currently just enumerating and drafting specification for things that can be done with a resource directory and that may assist in operating it. Okay. Can I scroll with that?
I hope so.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think we can stick with the table of contents for starts. So the largest part in there is reverse proxying. Now this is something that has been introduced in even in the motivational examples of the resource directory. That is, a client connects to the resource directory
be that by actually sending UDP messages, but making everything in between aware that that UDP messages can now go back and forth here, be that via co-op over TCP and thus creating a more persistent connection, or be that by co-op over WebSockets because that's the only thing that device can do because it is a web browser actually. And when such a device that device registers with the resource directory, it could ask the resource directory to play reverse proxy for it, because in the co-op over WebSocket example, if a device is actually a browser application, no one can connect there. This is also something that conceptually is happening in many lightweight M2M deployments, where there are no other connections than the one that the device is opening towards its lightweight M2M server, which is the resource directory. So basically what I'm doing here is just suggest a way of discovering support for an option that can be set with the resource directory at registration time that says, I suspect that that I'm not reachable from the outside. Please serve as a proxy for me. And rather than announcing the address from which I'm connecting, which is utterly useless to everyone who doesn't have the connection open, please mint an authority component and announce me under that, which is basically aligning with the alternative transports and the protocol negotiation. But to the lookup client that is working with the resource directory, it won't know the difference. It might observe that the address announced. Maybe we have an example a bit lower here. Yeah. So the lookup. Yeah. The lookup client may notice that this URI here looks like it is somewhere close to the resource directory, but without looking into opaque identifiers, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. So this is one thing that I think it would be useful to have spelled out somewhere before people start doing it without having thought about what could go wrong with it. So the RIP, another is a much smaller thing that was registering with infinite lifetime. So that was a request from Jim, if I remember correctly, that we currently specify lifetimes, and there might be situations in which it may be okay to say that my lifetime is infinite. We don't need to specify that in resource directory. That can be an extension. It can be discovered, and it should, in my opinion, look like that. And with that, for example, an application that registers for being proxied can say that my lifetime is practically infinite because you will know when my connection terminates, and then you'll kick me out, and as long as that doesn't happen, here I am. I'll skip that one. And the third one I'd like to point out is zone identifiers that came in very late in the resource directory when we thought about what does it actually mean if someone registers with a linked local address, because lookup clients might not be on that link. And what the resource directory now says is that there is a split horizon situation. The resource directory needs to know that there are clients on this side and on that side. But to the administrator, this means that because the administrator comes from some point in the network, it might not even be able to see some registrations. So in very particular situations, it might be a good idea to allow returning URIs that contain zone identifiers if it was specifically requested and the requester it was adequately authorized to obtain that information. So this is something that might be useful in the management interface. This is something that I wouldn't expect to be implemented by default in a resource directory, but if someone wants to use it, this is how it could be done. And also this serves as an example of how the resource directory can be expanded, how those expansion points are used. I don't really know where to go on with the document because I'm not using all of the features that I'm describing in there. So my question is, are there features in here that have an appeal to the working group? Are there features in here that you may be using yourself? or other features that should go in here.
So who in this room has a problem that one of these extensions would solve or would address?
Nobody using OMA?
Kind of.
Jim Schott, I don't have any problems that any of this ever solves because I don't have any of this stuff. The other place that I was looking at the infinite lifetime for is if you have somebody go in and be a third party configurer, you put a device into the direct resource directory. It makes sense to just go ahead and say it's there forever rather than forcing the device to register itself. So I think that's actually a really strong use case for that particular thing. And it's like, if you decommission it, then you know to go back and take it out of the directory.
Thank you.
So maybe I cannot speak for OMA, but I obviously see a value on the infinite lifetime because that's a continuous problem that you need to keep renewing the registration of a lightweight end-to-end client. Maybe other people from OMA could also voice an opinion, but I think maybe the problem is that we haven't read the draft, so it's hard to have an opinion yet. But that's another thing. I will at least review it for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the time also is conveniently up. So take it to the list is the correct answer here. So if any of this sounds like you might want to use this, please send a message to the list that will help Christian decide which of these we want to take up and which of these stays on the back burner for longer. Thank you. So see most of you on Friday, I hope. Or see most of you in the Think to Think research group meeting in 8 minutes.
One blue sheet. Oh, thanks.
Are you okay with 11 a.m. Thursday? I know Alex will be gone. But Alex said, well then.